Let's first take a few minutes to define the term baptism, which to me seems really obvious that in the Scriptures, baptism is immersion, a person being completely submerged in water. And there's a lot of scriptural evidence for this. First of all, from a metaphorical standpoint, in Romans 6:4, Paul says that we have been buried with him through baptism into death, thereby inviting the comparison between being buried underground with being buried underwater. Then in 1 Peter 3:20, Kepha likens baptism to Noah's flood, which was also an event involving death, resulting in the complete submerging and covering of the entire earth. Likewise, in 1 Corinthians 10, verses 1 and 2, Paul says that our fathers were all under the cloud and all passed through the sea, and all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. So again, we see baptism being described with imagery of the people being covered and underneath. In this case, imagery from the Exodus. First, with the pillar of cloud that led Israel by day, which even Psalm 105:39 says that God spread that cloud for a covering. And second, the Red Sea that walled up on either side of them, making a path for the people to walk through to their salvation. So those are four metaphorical comparisons that Scripture makes to baptism by immersion. But of course, we also see immersion as the mode of biblical baptism in practical examples. In 2 Kings 5:14, for instance, it says that Naaman went down and dipped himself 7 times in the Jordan to be healed from leprosy, and his flesh was restored. This word dipped is the same Hebrew word in Leviticus 9, where it says that Aaron dipped his finger in the blood of the sacrifice so he could apply it to the horns of the altar. And in the Septuagint, the ancient translation of the Hebrew Scriptures into Greek, the word used here in 2 Kings is the word for baptize. We also see immersion in the most important baptism account of them all, the immersion of Yeshua. In Matthew 3:16, for example, it says, "And when Jesus was baptized, immediately he went up from the water, and behold, the heavens were opened to him, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and coming to rest on him." Now, personally, I can only see this being understood in 2 ways, only one of which really makes sense. When it says he immediately went up from the water, either he had been standing or kneeling in the Jordan, getting water sprinkled or poured on him, then he takes the time to walk out of the water, stands on the shore, and then the heavens immediately open and the Spirit descends on him, etc. Or he had been submerged in the water, immersed, and as soon as his head came up out of the water, immediately the heavens opened, the Spirit descends, and the Father tells the Son he's delighted with him. That seems the most straightforward explanation to me, given the flow and plain sense understanding of the narrative. Not to mention the obvious use of the river itself. John the Baptist, Yochanan the Immerser, used the Jordan River to immerse people. And it says in John 3:23 that he was also baptizing in a specific town, quote, "because there were many waters there." So while it's conceivable they only used shallow parts of these water bodies where people stood there or kneeled or sat there and water was poured or sprinkled on them, especially depending upon the time of year and the depth of the river and streams, given the examples of Naaman and Yeshua, it seems more likely that the norm for these abundant bodies of water was that they were used for immersion. Additionally, there's a ton of archaeological evidence of the ancient mikvaot, the Jewish ritual baths, all throughout Israel and especially near the temple, which were deep enough for Jews to fully cleanse themselves by immersing themselves before entering into a sacred space. So when we talk about baptism in first century Israel, the normal, regular practice was immersion, which is still practiced in Judaism today. It wasn't something unique to the disciples of John or Yeshua. The act of immersion itself was not unusual. It was the reason for the immersion that was new in Yeshua. Now, does all this mean that full immersion is the only legitimate form of baptism? Could baptize also mean to wash or pour or sprinkle? Maybe, especially in the case of someone who's sick or old or otherwise physically incapable of being immersed for safety reasons or for some other reasonable explanation. Or if there simply isn't a body or container of water available sufficient for immersion. For example, where were the people baptized who were in Cornelius' house in Acts 10? It doesn't say. But if you're looking for biblical support to back up alternatives to immersion as a rule, you won't find it. The express picture we see consistently presented in Scripture is immersion.